My husband talks in his sleep. Chapter 1. A strange voice. The digital clock's red numbers burned 3:17 a.m. into the darkness when Sarah Martinez jolted awake. Something had pulled her from the depths of sleep. Not the usual sounds of their century-old Victorian house settling, nor the neighbor's cat yowling in the alley. This was different. Intimate. Disturbing. Beside her, David lay motionless, his breathing steady and deep, but his lips were moving. Sarah held her breath, straining to listen. At first, she caught only fragments, mumbled syllables that could have been innocent dream chatter. But then, clear as a bell cutting through the midnight air, came words that made her blood freeze. She shouldn't have seen it. The voice was David's throat, David's mouth, but the tone was all wrong. Deeper, rougher, like gravel scraping against stone. Now she has to disappear too. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. In 10 years of marriage, she'd never heard David talk in his sleep. He was the deepest sleeper she knew, the kind of man who could sleep through thunderstorms and construction work. And this voice, it carried a coldness she'd never heard from her gentle husband. She reached for him instinctively, her hand hovering inches from his shoulder. "David," she whispered. "Honey, are you awake?" His face remained peaceful in the pale moonlight, filtering through their gauze curtains. The same face she'd kissed goodnight 1,000 times. The same mouth that told her he loved her every morning. But now those lips moved again, and the alien voice continued its dark monologue. The lake. That's where they all end up. Deep water tells no tales. Sarah's trembling hand found her phone on the nightstand. With shaking fingers, she activated the voice recorder, pointing it toward David's sleeping form. Whatever was happening, she needed proof. She needed to know she wasn't losing her mind. For the next 20 minutes, she lay rigid beside her husband, capturing every word of the chilling one-sided conversation that seemed to spill from some hidden chamber of his unconscious mind. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Sarah mechanically went through the motions of making coffee. She'd managed perhaps an hour of restless sleep after David's nocturnal soliloquy ended. Now, watching him bound down the stairs with his usual morning energy, she felt like she was living in two different realities. Morning beautiful. David swept into the kitchen, planting a kiss on her cheek that should have felt normal, but somehow didn't. "You look tired. Rough night." Sarah studied his face, the warm brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled, the slight scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident he'd told her about countless times. Everything was exactly as it should be, exactly as it had been yesterday and the day before that. "David," she began carefully, setting down her coffee mug, "do you ever talk in your sleep?" He laughed, the same infectious sound that had made her fall in love with him at a faculty mixer 12 years ago. "Me? Sarah, I sleep like the dead. You know that. I've never been a sleep talker." He tilted his head, studying her with concern. "Why? Did I say something?" The phone in her robe pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She could show him the recording right now, play back his own voice speaking those terrible words. But something held her back, a primal instinct that whispered this knowledge might be dangerous. I thought I heard something, but it was probably just the house settling, or maybe I was dreaming." David moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist in a gesture that had always made her feel safe. Now it felt different, confining. "You've been working too hard at the gallery," he murmured against her hair. "All those late nights preparing for the Morrison exhibition. Maybe you should take a day off." Morrison. The name sent an unexpected chill down her spine, though she couldn't say why. After David left for his office at the university, Sarah sat alone in the kitchen, staring at her phone. The recording was there, time-stamped at 3:17 a.m. She pressed play, and that alien voice filled the space around her, speaking words that belonged in a crime novel, not in her peaceful suburban home. She shouldn't have seen it. Now she has to disappear too. The voice was unmistakably coming from David's throat, but it belonged to someone or something else entirely. Over the next week, Sarah developed a routine born of equal parts curiosity and dread. She would lie perfectly still beside David, feigning sleep while secretly recording his nighttime monologues. Each session revealed more disturbing details, as if some buried part of his psyche was compelled to confess its sins to the darkness. Marcus knew too much about the business, the strange voice said on Tuesday night. The break lines were easier than I thought they'd be. Made it look just like an accident. On Wednesday, the girl from the coffee shop, she saw me with the Henderson woman. Had to make sure she kept quiet. Permanent quiet. Thursday brought the most chilling revelation yet. 3 bodies now. The lake is getting crowded, but the depths are forgiving. They float for a while, then sink. Nature takes care of the rest. Sarah filled a notebook with transcriptions, her handwriting growing more erratic with each entry. During the day, David remained the same loving, slightly absent-minded literature professor she'd married. He graded papers at the kitchen table, complained about university politics, and made terrible puns that made her groan and laugh simultaneously. But at night, he became someone else entirely, someone who spoke of murder with the casual detachment of discussing the weather. She began researching sleep disorders, hoping for a rational explanation. Sleep talking was common enough, but this was different. The voice wasn't David's, not really, and the content was too specific, too detailed to be random dream imagery. These sounded like memories, confessions. The worst part was how the nighttime revelations began to color her perception of their daytime interactions. When David mentioned running errands, she wondered where he'd really been. When he came home late from faculty meetings, she found herself checking his clothes for any sign of what? Blood? Dirt from a lakeside burial? She was losing her mind. That had to be it. 10 years of marriage, and suddenly she was suspecting her gentle husband of being a serial killer based on some bizarre sleep-talking episodes. But then David mentioned going to Morrison Lake for a department picnic, and Sarah's blood turned to ice. The Millbrook Public Library's computer terminals hummed quietly around Sarah as she typed Marcus Wellington into the search engine. She'd been putting off this moment for days, afraid of what she might find, but the compulsion to know had finally overwhelmed her fear. The first result made her stomach lurch. Local businessman dies in suspicious accident. The headline was 18 months old. Below it, a professional headshot showed a man in his 40s with kind eyes and a genuine smile. Sarah recognized him immediately, not from personal acquaintance, but from photos in David's old office albums. Marcus Wellington had been David's business partner in some consulting venture they'd started and abandoned years ago. According to the article, Wellington's car had crashed into a tree on a rural stretch of highway. Investigators initially suspected mechanical failure, but the family had hired a private investigator who suggested the brake lines might have been tampered with. The case remained open but inactive. Sarah's hands trembled as she scrolled through related articles. Marcus Wellington, survived by a wife and 2 young children. A man described by friends as cautious and careful. Someone who maintained his vehicle religiously. Not the type to die in a random mechanical failure. The sleep voice words echoed in her memory. The brake lines were easier than I thought they'd be. She searched for more names from David's nocturnal confessions. The Henderson woman yielded results too. Dr. Patricia Henderson, a marine biologist who had disappeared 6 months ago while researching water quality at various regional lakes. Her car had been found abandoned at Morrison Lake. She'd never been seen again. The girl from the coffee shop was harder to track down, but eventually Sarah found a missing person report for Jessica Reeves, a 22-year-old barista who'd vanished 3 months ago. The last place she'd been seen was the campus coffee house, where David bought his morning coffee every day. 3 names. 3 people connected, however tenuously, to David's world. 3 people who had died or disappeared under mysterious circumstances. And according to the voice that spoke through her husband's sleeping mouth, 3 bodies resting at the bottom of Morrison Lake. Sarah printed the articles with shaking hands, her mind reeling with the implications. This couldn't be coincidence, but also couldn't be real. David, couldn't possibly be capable of such horrors. Could he? That evening, Sarah sat across from David at their dinner table, watching him twirl pasta around his fork while he chatted about his day. Everything about the scene was achingly normal. The mismatched placemats she bought at a craft fair, the wine glasses that had been a wedding gift, the soft jazz playing from their ancient stereo system. But Sarah felt like she was dining with a stranger. The Morrison Lake cleanup project is really gaining momentum, David said between bites. The Environmental Science Department is planning a major research initiative their next semester. Should be fascinating to see what they discover in those depths. The word depths hit Sarah like a physical blow. She set down her fork, no longer able to pretend appetite. David, she began, her voice carefully controlled. Have you ever had unusual dreams? Nightmares, maybe? About people dying. David's fork paused halfway to his mouth. For just a moment, something flickered across his features. So brief, she might have imagined it. A shadow of something dark and aware. Then his familiar expression returned. That's an odd question, sweetheart. Why would you ask something like that? I don't know. I've been having strange dreams lately, and I wondered if it might be something in the house. Old places sometimes hold onto things, don't they? Memories. Echoes. David studied her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. When had his gaze become so penetrating? When had she started feeling like prey under his observation? Sarah, he said slowly, you've been acting strangely for the past week. Jumpy, paranoid. Are you sure you're feeling all right? I'm fine, she lied, forcing a smile. Just tired, like you said. Maybe I should see a doctor. Get something to help me sleep better. That might be a good idea. David reached across the table and took her hand. His touch, once comforting, now felt possessive. I worry about you. You're all I have in this world. The words that should have been romantic sent a chill through her. All he had in this world. What had happened to everyone else who had been part of his world? Marcus Wellington, who trusted him enough to go into business with him. Dr. Henderson, who might have discovered something she shouldn't have. Jessica Reeves, who'd serve him coffee every morning. All gone. All disappeared or dead under suspicious circumstances. And now Sarah, who discovered his secret nocturnal confessions, was apparently having strange dreams and acting paranoid. Would she be next to disappear into Morrison Lake's depths? That night, she lay awake long after David's breathing had evened into sleep's rhythm, waiting for the other voice to emerge. But David remained silent, as if some part of him sensed her vigilance. Sarah waited until David left for his Thursday morning faculty meeting before beginning her search of his study. She'd never snooped through his personal belongings before. Their marriage had been built on trust and mutual respect. But trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. David's study occupied the converted sunroom at the back of their house, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and dominated by an antique oak desk that had belonged to his grandfather. Sarah had always loved this room, had often curled up in a reading chair by the window while David graded papers or prepared lectures. Now the familiar space felt foreign and threatening. She started with the obvious places: desk drawers, filing cabinets, the spaces behind books on the shelves. Most of what she found was exactly what she'd expected: academic papers, correspondence with colleagues, notes for future research projects, the detritus of a professor's life. But the bottom drawer of David's filing cabinet was locked. Sarah had never noticed it before. In 10 years of living in this house, she'd assumed all the furniture was purely functional. Now, examining the drawer more closely, she could see the small keyhole hidden beneath the brass handle. She searched for 20 minutes before finding the key taped to the underside of David's desk lamp. Her hand shook as she inserted it into the lock and turned. Inside the drawer, manila folders contained documents that made no sense in the context of David Martinez, literature professor and devoted husband. A passport bearing David's photograph, but issued to someone named Daniel Warren. Birth certificates, social security cards, and a driver's license, all in the name of Daniel Warren. But it was the photographs that made Sarah's knees buckle. Pictures of people she didn't recognize, candid shots that seemed to have been taken without the subject's knowledge. Some of the faces she recognized from her internet research: Marcus Wellington getting into his car, Dr. Patricia Henderson collecting water samples at a lake, Jessica Reeves walking home from work. Each photograph was paper-clipped to what looked like surveillance notes. Marcus's daily routine, his home address, his wife's schedule, Patricia's research locations, and the time she usually worked alone. Jessica's work shifts, and the route she took to her apartment. At the bottom of the drawer lay a journal bound in black leather. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened it and began to read entries written in David's familiar handwriting. Subject exhibits standard patterns. Trusting nature makes approach easier. Timeline: 2 weeks for full behavioral mapping. Marcus becoming suspicious about the Hartford project. Intervention necessary before he contacts authorities. The Henderson woman's research is getting too close to the disposal site. She must be stopped before the spring thaw reveals what should stay hidden. The final entry was dated just 3 days ago. Sarah showing signs of awareness. Her questions about dreams and unusual behavior patterns indicate possible discovery of nocturnal revelations. Contingency planning required. Morrison Lake has room for one more. The journal slipped from Sarah's numb fingers, hitting the floor with a sound like a gunshot in a silent house. Her husband, the man she loved and trusted for over a decade, was planning to kill her. That night, Sarah lay in bed with every nerve ending screaming danger. She'd replaced the journal and locked the drawer, but the knowledge it contained burned in her mind like acid. David lay beside her, apparently sleeping peacefully, but she knew now that appearances meant nothing. She'd married a monster who wore her husband's face. When the alien voice finally emerged from David's throat, Sarah was ready with her recorder. But tonight's confession made her previous discoveries seem almost mundane. "Sarah's getting too close," the voice said with clinical detachment. "She found the journal today. I could smell her fear when I came home. She's trying to hide it, but Daniel always knows." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Daniel, the name from the fake documents. But how could the voice know she'd been in the study? David had been at the university all day. David's feelings for her are inconvenient, the voice continued. He fights me when I plan her elimination. But David is weak. He's always been weak. That's why I exist. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The voice wasn't just David talking in his sleep. It was someone else entirely. Someone who called himself Daniel, who lived inside David's body and mind, watching through David's eyes even when David thought he was in control. 3 personalities in one flesh, Daniel's voice mused. David, who loves and trusts and believes in goodness. Marcus, who handles the necessary wet work. And me, who orchestrates it all. Poor Sarah doesn't realize she's been sleeping next to a crowded room. Marcus, another name, another personality. Sarah's research hadn't prepared her for this. The possibility that her husband wasn't just a killer, but a man whose mind had fractured into multiple identities, each serving a different function in an organized system of murder. The lake will claim her before the weekend, Daniel continued. An accidental drowning. Tragic. David will be devastated, of course. He'll need time to grieve. Perhaps a sabbatical. A chance to relocate somewhere fresh. Somewhere with new hunting grounds. Sarah bit her tongue to keep from screaming. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth as she forced herself to remain motionless, to maintain the illusion of sleep while her world crumbled around her. She had less than 3 days to live, and the man who planned to kill her was lying inches away, wearing the face of the only person she'd ever truly loved. Detective Maria Reyes looked up from her coffee as Sarah entered the precinct lobby the next morning. Sarah had chosen her carefully. The detective had been mentioned in several articles about the unsolved disappearances, and her reputation suggested someone who might listen to an impossible story. "Mrs. Martinez, you said on the phone this was about your husband." Sarah's hand shook as she sat across from the detective in a small interview room. How could she explain that the man she'd lived with for 10 years was a multiple personality killer without sounding completely insane? "I have reason to believe my husband David may be connected to several disappearances in the area," she began. "Marcus Wellington, Patricia Henderson, Jessica Reeves." Detective Reyes leaned forward, suddenly more attentive. Those are active cases in my department. What makes you think your husband is involved? Sarah pulled out her phone and played one of the recordings. Daniel's voice filled the small room, speaking casually about brake lines and bodies in the lake. Detective Reyes listened with growing concern, taking notes as the alien voice detailed methods of murder and disposal. Mrs. Martinez, the detective said carefully when the recording ended. Sleep talking isn't admissible evidence in court, and the voice on this recording, it doesn't sound quite like normal sleep speech. Because it's not normal, Sarah said desperately. I think my husband has multiple personality disorder. The voice calls itself Daniel, and it knows things, specific things about crimes that match the disappearances you're investigating. Detective Reyes studied Sarah with professional skepticism. Have you considered that your husband might be playing an elaborate prank? Or that you might be experiencing some kind of psychological break stress can manifest in? I found surveillance photos, Sarah interrupted, pulling out printed copies she'd made from David's hidden files. Pictures of all 3 victims taken without their knowledge, and a journal documenting their daily routines, their vulnerabilities. The detective's expression changed as she examined photographs. The professional skepticism remained, but it was now tempered with genuine concern. Mrs. Martinez, if what you're telling me is true, you could be in serious danger. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Because I love him, Sarah whispered. Because the man I married is gentle and kind, and I couldn't believe he was capable of this. But I think the man I married might not be in control anymore. Detective Reyes was quiet for a long moment. We'll need to investigate this thoroughly. In the meantime, I strongly suggest you stay somewhere else. Do you have family? Friends? Sarah shook her head. David had gradually isolated her from most of her support network over the years, not obviously or cruelly, but through subtle suggestions and scheduling conflicts that had slowly eroded her other relationships. I'll arrange for a safe house, Detective Reyes said. But first, we need more evidence. Would you be willing to wear a wire to record more conversations? The thought of going back into that house, of lying beside the thing that wore David's face while Daniel planned her murder, made Sarah's skin crawl. But she nodded anyway. If there was any chance of saving David or stopping Daniel, she had to try. Sarah's hands shook as she packed an overnight bag, Detective Reyes watching from the doorway of their bedroom. The house that had been her sanctuary for 10 years now felt like a trap waiting to spring. He knows, Sarah said, throwing clothes into her suitcase without really seeing them. Daniel said he could smell my fear yesterday. He knows I've discovered the truth. The safe house is ready, Detective Reyes assured her. We'll have officers stationed there around the clock. You will be protected while we track him down. But as they prepared to leave, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from David's number. Sweetheart, there's been a family emergency. I'm at Morrison Lake. Please come immediately. I need you. Detective Reyes read the message and cursed. He's trying to lure you to the disposal site. Classic predator behavior. That's not David, Sarah whispered. David would never. He'd call, not text something like that. And he'd say where the emergency was, who was involved. This is Daniel using David's phone. Another message arrived. Sarah, please hurry. Something terrible has happened to my sister. I can't explain over text. Just come to the lake. I'm waiting by the old pier. David didn't have a sister. In 10 years of marriage, he'd never mentioned any siblings. This was definitely Daniel, poorly mimicking David's communication style. We can use this, Detective Reyes said grimly. Set up a trap of our own. But Sarah was already moving toward the front door. He has David's body. Whatever twisted thing Daniel is, he's trapped inside my husband's mind. If we corner him, if he feels threatened. Sarah, where are you going? I'm going to end this, Sarah said, grabbing David's car keys from a hook by the door. One way or another. She was out the door and starting the engine before Detective Reyes could stop her. In the rearview mirror, she saw the detective running for her own vehicle, speaking rapidly into her radio. Sarah knew she was probably driving to her death, but she also knew that David, the real David, was still trapped somewhere inside that fractured mind. And if there was any chance of saving him, of reaching him before Daniel's madness consumed everything that remained of the man she loved, she had to try. Morrison Lake had claimed 3 victims already. She wouldn't let it claim a 4th without a fight. The pier at Morrison Lake stretched into the gathering dusk like an accusatory finger, pointing at the secrets hidden beneath the water surface. Sarah parked at the tree line and approached on foot, her phone clutched in one hand and pepper spray in the other, though she wondered if such weapons would be effective against someone who had already murdered 3 people. David stood at the end of the pier, his back to her, staring out over the water where police divers had recovered the bodies just hours before. From a distance, he looked exactly like the man she'd married. Same height, same posture, same way of standing with his hands clasped behind his back when he was thinking deeply. But Sarah knew now that appearances were the most dangerous lie of all. "David," she called softly as she stepped onto the wooden planks. He turned, and Sarah's heart broke. His face was David's face, every familiar line and expression exactly as she remembered. But his eyes held depths she'd never seen before, dark currents that spoke of terrible knowledge. "Sarah," he said, and even his voice was perfectly David's. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "Where's the family emergency?" she asked, keeping her distance. "You said there was something wrong with your sister." David's expression flickered, a brief shadow of confusion crossing his features. "My sister? Sarah, I don't have a sister. You know that." For a moment, hope flared in Sarah's chest. This was David speaking, confused, worried David who had no memory of the text messages Daniel had sent. "David, listen to me carefully," she said, taking a tentative step closer. "We need to leave this place. Right now, there are things happening that you don't understand. Things that... Oh, but I understand perfectly." The voice that interrupted her was still coming from David's mouth, but the inflection had changed entirely. Colder, more controlled. "I understand that you've been very busy this week, Sarah, talking to police, searching through private files, making recordings of conversations you weren't supposed to hear." Daniel was back in control. "I've been trying to protect David from the truth," Daniel continued, his expression shifting into something predatory. "But you've made that impossible. Now I'll have to live with the knowledge of what we've done, what we are. Sarah backed away, but there was nowhere to go except off the pier into the dark water. "You're not David. You're something else, something sick that's taken over his mind." Daniel laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "Taken over? Oh, Sarah, I didn't take over anything. I was born from David's own darkness. Every cruel thought he ever had, every moment of rage or jealousy or hatred, I'm made of those pieces. I'm what David would be if he stopped lying to himself about being good." "That's not true," Sarah said desperately. "David is good. He's kind and gentle and..." "David is weak," Daniel snarled. "He loved you so much that he couldn't bear to hurt you himself. That's why I exist, to do what needs to be done." Behind David's eyes, Sarah thought she saw something else, a flicker of the man she'd married, trapped and horrified by what his body was saying. "David," she whispered, "I know you're in there. Fight him." For just a moment, David's expression softened. "Sarah, run. Please. I can't stop him much longer." But then Daniel was back, reaching into his jacket and pulling out something that gleamed in the fading light. A knife. "Enough," Daniel said. "Morrison Lake is hungry, and you've kept it waiting long enough." "David, if you can hear me, I love you," Sarah said, backing toward the edge of the pier as Daniel advanced with the knife. "I know this isn't your choice. I know you're fighting him." Daniel paused, and Sarah saw the internal struggle playing out across David's features, muscles twitching, expressions shifting like storm clouds across his face. He's trying to stop me," Daniel said, sounding genuinely surprised. "David's stronger than I thought, but not strong enough." Sarah's heel hit the edge of the pier. Behind her, dark water lapped against the wooden posts, and she knew that 3 bodies lay somewhere in those depths. In moments, she would join them unless she could reach the David she loved. "Remember our first date?" she said desperately. "You took me to that terrible poetry reading at the coffee shop downtown. The poet was awful, but you whispered commentary in my ear that made me laugh so hard we got kicked out." David's knife hand wavered. "Sarah, remember our wedding day? You cried during your vows. You said you'd never believed in soulmates until you met me." "Stop," Daniel growled, but his voice was strained. "Those memories are poison. They make David weak." "Remember the night we bought this house?" Sarah continued, tears streaming down her face. "We danced in the empty living room to music from your phone. You said we'd grow old together here. You promised me 50 years. The knife clattered to the wooden planks as David grabbed his head with both hands, crying out in apparent agony. "Get out," he screamed, but Sarah couldn't tell which personality was speaking. "Get out of my head." This was her chance. Sarah lunged forward, snatching the knife and hurling it into the lake. Without its weight, it might not reach the bodies in the depths, but at least Daniel couldn't use it against her. "David, listen to my voice," she said, grabbing his face between her hands. "Come back to me. Come back." When he looked up, his eyes were David's eyes, confused, terrified, but unmistakably the man she'd married. "Sarah, what's happening to me? I keep having these dreams, these terrible dreams where I hurt people, but they feel so real." "It's not dreams, David. It's..." His expression shifted again, becoming cold and calculating. Daniel was fighting back. "Enough games," Daniel snarled, lunging towards Sarah with his bare hands. But David was fighting too now, and the body they shared jerked and stumbled as 2 minds battled for control. Sarah dodged the grasping hands and ran for the shore, screaming for help. Behind her, she heard David/Daniel fall to the pier with a sickening thud, still struggling against himself. In the distance, sirens wailed. Detective Reyes had tracked her down, but as police cars surrounded the lake, Sarah wondered if they would be arresting David or Daniel, and whether there was any difference anymore. The arrest was surreal. Sarah watched from behind police barriers as officers approached the pier where David sat motionless, staring at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. He offered no resistance when they handcuffed him, didn't speak when they read him his rights, but as they led him toward the patrol car, he looked directly at Sarah with eyes that held recognition and devastating grief. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and she knew it was David speaking. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I never meant for any of this to happen." Detective Reyes appeared at Sarah's side. "The psychiatric evaluation will determine his fitness to stand trial. Multiple personality disorder is a recognized mental illness, but it doesn't automatically constitute an insanity defense." "What happens now?" Sarah asked, unable to look away from the patrol car, carrying her husband to jail. "Now we build a case. The bodies in the lake will provide forensic evidence. Your recordings, the surveillance photos, the journal, it all adds up to premeditated murder. But the psychological component complicates everything." Sarah watched the taillights disappear into the darkness. Somewhere in that car, David was trapped with the monster that had destroyed their life together. She wondered if he would ever be free, or if Daniel's poison had spread too deeply to ever be cleansed. "Mrs. Martinez," Detective Reyes said gently, "you should know. The forensics team found something else at the lake. A 4th set of remains, older than the others. We're running dental records, but preliminary examination suggests it's been there for at least 5 years. 5 years. Before David had met Sarah. Before their marriage. Before she'd thought she'd known everything about the man she loved. How long had Daniel existed? How many victims had there been before Marcus, Patricia, and Jessica? How many secrets lay buried in the depths of Morrison Lake and in the fractured landscape of David's mind? There's something else," the detective continued. "During booking, your husband asked to speak with a psychiatrist. He claims he wants to confess everything, but only if he can be sure it's David talking and not the other one." Sarah closed her eyes, remembering David's face when he'd looked at her with recognition and horror. Some part of him was still fighting, still trying to surface through Daniel's control. "Can I see him?" she asked. "That's not advisable. He's considered extremely dangerous, and—" "Detective," Sarah interrupted, "if there's any chance of reaching David, of getting him to help stop Daniel permanently, I have to try. I'm the only one who might be able to reach him." Detective Reyes studied her for a long moment. "All right, but it'll be through reinforced glass, and we'll have guards present. Any sign of aggressive behavior, and the visit ends immediately." Sarah nodded, knowing she was probably walking into another trap. But if David was still fighting somewhere inside that fractured mind, she couldn't abandon him to Daniel's darkness. The county jail's visiting room smelled of industrial disinfectant and desperation. Sarah sat across from the reinforced glass partition, waiting for them to bring David in. Her reflection stared back at her from the scratched surface, hollow-eyed, pale, aged by revelations that had shattered her understanding of everything she'd believed about love and trust. When the door opened and David entered in orange prison scrubs, Sarah's heart broke all over again. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of what he carried. But his eyes, when he picked up the phone, were David's eyes, haunted and ashamed, but recognizably human. "Sarah," he said, his voice cracking, "you shouldn't have come. It's not safe." "David, I need you to listen to me," she said urgently. "The police found 4 bodies in the lake. Daniel killed 4 people, and there might be more. You have to help them understand what's happening in your mind." David's face contorted with anguish. "I remember pieces now. Fragments. Like watching someone else's nightmares, but knowing they're real. The brake lines on Marcus's car. I remember buying the tools, but it felt like sleepwalking. And Dr. Henderson. God, Sarah, I can see her face when she realized what was happening." "It wasn't you," Sarah said desperately. "It was Daniel. You said yourself he was born from your darkness, but that means he's separate from who you really are." "No," David whispered, tears streaming down his face. "That's what I wanted to believe, but the psychiatrist here helped me understand. Daniel isn't some external force. He's me, Sarah. He's the part of me I never wanted to acknowledge. The part that gets angry when students challenge my authority, that resents successful colleagues, that sometimes looks at beautiful women and imagines terrible things." Sarah's hands pressed against the glass. "Everyone has dark thoughts, David. That doesn't make them killers. But I acted on them. Maybe not consciously, but some part of me wanted Marcus gone when he threatened to expose our business irregularities. Some part of me was attracted to Dr. Henderson and couldn't handle her rejection. Daniel didn't create those feelings. He just removed the moral barriers that kept me from acting on them." Behind David's shoulder, Sarah saw a guard shift nervously. Even in shackles, even behind reinforced glass, David radiated an aura of contained violence that made everyone uncomfortable. "David, look at me," Sarah commanded. "The man I married wouldn't hurt anyone. You cried when we accidentally hit a deer with our car. You donate to animal shelters and homeless programs. You spend your weekends volunteering at the literacy center. And I also spend my nights killing people," David said flatly. "Both things are true, Sarah. I'm not just David or just Daniel, I'm both. I'm a man who can cry over a wounded animal and then drown a woman who threatened to expose my crimes." The phone slipped from Sarah's numb fingers. This wasn't the confession she'd hoped for. David taking responsibility while maintaining his essential innocence. This was something far worse. A man recognizing that the monster and the husband were both equally real parts of his fractured identity. When she picked up the phone again, David was watching her with an expression of infinite sadness. "I called you here to say goodbye," he said quietly, "and to warn you. They're transferring me to a secure psychiatric facility tomorrow. But Sarah, I can feel Daniel getting stronger. The more I acknowledge him, the more control he gains. I don't know how much longer I can fight him. David, if he breaks free completely, if you find a way to escape custody, you have to run. Change your name, move across the country, disappear, because he knows you're the only one who can identify him, and he'll never stop hunting you." The line went dead as guards moved to escort David back to his cell. Sarah watched him walk away, shoulders hunched under a burden no human should have to carry. She'd come here hoping to save her husband. Instead, she'd learned that the man she loved and the monster who terrorized her were the same person, and that person was losing the battle for his own soul. 6 months later, Sarah sat in the front row of a crowded courtroom, watching her husband's trial unfold like a surreal theater production. David sat at the defendant's table between two court-appointed attorneys, his face carefully neutral as prosecutors laid out the evidence against him. The case had attracted national attention, not just because of the multiple murders, but because of the psychological complexity involved. Expert witnesses debated the nature of dissociative identity disorder, the relationship between mental illness and criminal responsibility, and whether someone could be held accountable for crimes committed by an alternate personality. The defendant's own recordings demonstrate clear premeditation, the prosecutor argued, playing one of Daniel's nocturnal confessions for the jury. These aren't the random ravings of someone experiencing a psychotic break. They show detailed planning, awareness of consequences, and deliberate attempts to avoid detection. David's defense attorney countered with testimony from psychiatrists who argued that his client was genuinely suffering from a severe mental disorder that compromised his ability to control his actions. But Sarah knew the truth was more complicated than either side wanted to admit. David wasn't completely innocent. He'd acknowledged that Daniel emerged from his own suppressed darkness. But he wasn't entirely guilty either, since Daniel had operated largely outside his conscious awareness. The most difficult moment came when David himself took the stand. Sarah watched the man she'd loved struggle to explain the inexplicable, how he could be both victim and perpetrator, both the grieving husband and the calculating killer. "I remember fragments," David testified, "like watching a movie where someone else is playing my part. I remember following Marcus Wellington, learning his routines, but it felt distant, unreal. It wasn't until I was actually tampering with his brake lines that the reality hit me, and by then, it was too late to stop." "But you continued killing after Marcus Wellington," the prosecutor pressed. "Dr. Henderson, Jessica Reeves, and at least one other victim we've identified. Why didn't you seek help after the first murder?" David was quiet for a long moment. "Because part of me didn't want to stop," he admitted. "Daniel wasn't just using my body. He was fulfilling desires I'd never admitted having. The power over life and death, the ability to solve problems permanently. It was seductive in a way I'm ashamed to acknowledge." Sarah closed her eyes, unable to watch as her husband condemned himself with his honesty. The jury's faces showed a mixture of horror and fascination. They were witnessing something unprecedented in criminal justice. The verdict, when it came, satisfied no one. Guilty of 4 counts of premeditated murder, but with a recommendation for psychiatric treatment rather than execution. David would spend the rest of his life in a secure mental health facility, hopefully receiving the help he needed while ensuring he could never hurt anyone again. As they led him away in shackles, David looked directly at Sarah for the first time since the trial began. His lips formed words she couldn't hear over the courtroom noise, but she could read them clearly. "I'm sorry." Then he was gone, and Sarah was left alone with the ruins of everything she'd once believed about love, trust, and the nature of human evil.